I feel like I'm in class and I shouldn't. Thank you. Good morning. Welcome to this interesting and exciting panel on a very new and exciting movie, Nomadland. First, María Oliver-Rotger will talk. She's an associate professor at the Universitat Pompeu Fabra in the Department of Humanities. She's a member of the research group of comparative literature, and she's a doctorate on the Autonomous University of Barcelona. Her area of work, her fields of research are English literature as a broad one and American literature, specialist in Chicano literature, feminist literature, literary theory, and she has edited Identity, Diaspora, and Return in American Literature, and wrote in a book, Battlegrounds and Crossroads, Social and Imaginary Space in Writings by Chicanas. She's also published in a number of journals and magazines, especially on Chicano and feminist studies. So, all yours, yeah.
Thank you very much, Tony. I'm very pleased to be chaired by a nomadic Mallorcan like myself, and also very pleased to be here in a sort of monographic panel on Chloé Zhao's film, and as well as being here at this conference hosted by friends and longtime friends and colleagues such as Amaya Ibarraran, David Rio, and Ángel Chaparro. So it's an honor and it's a pleasure. You can see here the poster of Nomadland, the film, and also the cover, the book cover. The film was based on Nomadland. It's the homonymous, yes, the title is homonymous, Nomadland Surviving America in the 21st Century by Jessica Bruder. Frances McDormand commissioned Zhao to ground her script on Bruder's work. And the book is the journalist's investigative account on the precarious yet resilient lives of US senior citizens who, after the 2008 financial crisis, made their homes in adapted vehicles. And I would like to start with a brief reference on a few critical reviews. Critical reviews that were critical on Nomadland upon its release. Some critics dubbed it as a neoliberal fantasy and argued that Nomadland has disregarded Bruder's denunciation of the precarious labor conditions of aging nomadic van dwellers under global capitalism. And others sustained that the film partakes of a postmodern film culture catering to progressive audiences and their fantasies of transgression, liberation, and revolution. A culture where the material and emotional harm of social exclusion is dealt with ambivalently or ambiguously and is superseded by an emphasis on freedom and personal choice. My discussion suggests that looking at Zhao's film in its own terms as a rite of passage and even as a pilgrimage, but not a linear pilgrimage, but a wandering pilgrimage, in the light of feminist hospitality, reveals an emphasis on non-dominating self-other relations, which implicitly denunciate the logic of the frontier, of the mastery and the conquest of the frontier, this notion that is so prevalent in the American imaginary. This affirmation, this picture is taken actually from, it's been widely circulated, it's Linda May, who represents herself in the film, a fictionalized version of herself. This affirmation, houseless, not homeless, is pronounced by a van-dwelling nomad in Bruder's book and is voiced in the first scenes of the film by the main character, this aging woman, Fern, in grief, who has just been evicted from her job and her home. And the director builds on this very opposition to explore the consequences of grief, loss, and forced mobility. Her nomadism, Fern's nomadism, is not, as she says in a rebuke to her brother-in-law, a willed chucking of everything to hit the road, but is rather a decision forced upon her by the pressures of a market economy. And like her, Linda May, Swanky, Bob Wells, who also play fictionalized versions of themselves, so they're not real actors. They have worked all their lives, they are eligible for very few jobs, cannot get by on early retirement, and have abandoned the idea of a traditional home to save money. So their lives are traversed by patterns of exclusion within inclusion. Okay, they are American citizens, but they are excluded from decent retirement pension. They are included within capitalism, but through temporary jobs that take advantage of their long life or lifelong responsibility. And also, they take advantage of their precariousness and vulnerability as potential retirees, all right? So they are also, rootless in the sense that they have to travel continuously from job to job, all right? And in this context, Fern's physical journeys, which are parallel to an internal journey and transformation, encourage a reflection on the sociocultural ideological ties between intimacy, home, space, and community, all right? And here you see the scenes that feature Amazon, which is featured very aseptically, very cleanly, and it's kind of the representation of the quintessential representation of the corporate giant in this system that profits from this precariousness and that results in this houselessness, but not homelessness, as she cares to point out, all right, as Fern cares to point out. So the itinerant workers establish human relations in space that are no longer connected to the boundedness and belonging of kin and community. Yes, we associate house and home with territoriality, boundedness, home, community, okay? But Nomadland also signals place as tied to intimacy and identity, and properties and objects as tied to intimacy and identity. Nomadland opens with this moving scene of Fern picking up a few items from her former home, among which is her husband's jacket, a powerful symbol of her silent, intimate greed. She wears this jacket throughout the whole film, and it's an emotionally and sensorially charged reminder of an affective bond to her home in Empire. She has been evicted from. The home belonged to the company she was working for. And so Zhao inquires also into what human beings become when dispossessed not only of their things and their property, nor even their house, but what links them to their interiority and their intimacy, all right? And this is what she has been ripped from what Anne Dufour-Mantel, a specialist on a philosopher, specialist on Derrida, she calls topology or topography, yes, of the intimate, all right? The most secret moments of her existence, all right? And throughout the film, Zhao points at the significance of the apparently banal possessions and moments of this intimate existence, all right? She has these possessions in her van, and they all have emotional resonances of home, and she carries them with her, all right? In an intimate conversation with Linda May in her van, Fern tells her how she has turned her husband's fishing box into a cupboard and extra counter space. And she also shows her the autumn leaf dish set her father collected over the years and gave to her upon her graduation. These objects are part of the intimate geography of her adapted vehicle, where previous domestic lives and attachments, there's also family pictures, intersect with her mobile condition. Now, for feminist hospitality, and I'm talking about feminist hospitality and inhospitable relations, all right? This journey, Fern's journey or pilgrimage or wandering circular pilgrimage is lined with a series of significant others inhospitable encounters. Everybody in Nomadland is very nice, is quite nice. There's nice people. And Zhao creates this universe in which people are kind to each other. But these encounters, in a way, however well-meaning and well-intended, they either disrupt or enhance the self-development of the character and this inner space I'm talking about. So from the point of view of hospitality, being a rightful host involves being able to receive in your place, answering for a dwelling place, for that represents your identity, your space, your limits, all right, your abode, all right, your hearth, your home, okay? But feminist hospitality queries the association between mastery, ownership, and hospitality, and proposes an emphasis on the connection between people that overturn this investment of property with mastery, control, and therefore a place where the guests have to adapt to the rules of the hosts, okay? So feminist hospitality considers the disruption, and I quote, of the identity of the host or the property that constitutes the host's identity, and proposes instead an ethical relationship between a me and a you who are not potentially hostile but may transform each other mutually. It also considers whether a hostess can be so in her own right without being subject to the laws of the master of the house. In the film, Dave's accidental breaking of the autumn leaf set anticipates the well-intended but unsuccessful welcome of Fern in his family home, or in his son's family home, which is going to be his by extension. Dave's invitation to Fern is an act of conditional hospitality that is shown to expropriate Fern of her identity and selfhood in the making. All right, Fern's sister invitation is also presented as potentially stranging and confining. So these two encounters can be termed as instances of hospitality, okay? A hospitality that is in some ways ambivalent or hostile, okay? And in which the guest is hostage, you know, rather than hosted, is hostage to their hospitality because there's no place for her grief, for self-development in their homes, all right? And to, you know, make matters worse, in Dolly's home, Fern's sister's place, property and economic status are well embedded into what Bob Wells calls the tyranny of the dollar. Bob Wells is this guru that has brought the nomads together and has created networks among them. So Dolly's husband, George, is a real estate investor and a speculator who wishes he had had the money in 2008, and I quote from it, to buy everything and be able to sell it now. In an argument with him, Fern points at the vulnerability created by capital accumulation and endless debt. And she says, I think it's strange that you encourage people to use their savings, their life savings, to get in debt just to buy houses they can't afford. So Fern's refusal to stay at her sister's implies her rejection as well of the economic system that enables their hospitality toward her, and therefore of the ways in which this system shapes the lives and conditions the lives of middle-class families. And then there's the second hospitable offer I was mentioning of Dave, who has just been a grandfather, would like Fern to live under his son's roof. There is a centrality of a newborn baby boy in the family and the complicity between father and son as they play the piano, which underscore a harmony based on patrilineal descent, on the rules of the master, a conjugal model, which Fern has already lived through happily, all right, and the ties of bloodkin, all right? So these are the conditions that Fern has to adjust to and that, of course, she rejects, all right? The second type of hospitality that I am referring to is non-conditional mutual hospitality, all right? Actually, sorry, I forgot about the slides. I was talking, all right? These encounters where Fern is both a guest and a host, all right? And these mutual exchanges are significantly set in the cramped intimacy of Fern's adapted van, or render in close-up shots of the nomads' parking grounds. And this in the same scene in which Fern shows Linda the new arrangements of her van, the latter tells her of becoming suicidal in the face of joblessness and a meager pension of $500 a month after a hard life as a worker and a mother. Linda decides to leave, move on, and live with the nomads, or join this nomadic lifestyle. And this will lead Fern to attend Bob Wells' rubber tramp rendezvous. And her meeting with Bob Wells also brings an illuminating gift, as he explains that his grief over the death of his son motivated his creation of this survival network for nomads who had suffered multiple losses. Fern's relationship to Swanky Wheels adds another dimension to her transformation through mutual or unconditional hospitality, all right? It's a relationship where, these are relationships where the feminine not understood, although in many cases it happens, it so happens that it's women relating to each other. But Tracy McNulty, a theorist on hospitality, defines the feminine not as a gender, but as the reception or the recognition that there is always an internal marking of alterity within the self, the index of the other's implication in our own self-transformation, okay? And Swanky is the mouthpiece of this welcoming of this other, which is nature in this case, all right? A welcoming of nature as unconditional hospitality, a kind of welcoming of nature that it doesn't involve mastery, it doesn't involve domination, and just leaves nature untouched as it is, as a thou, as a person with her own identity, you're right? Not as an object of knowledge or appropriation, but something that by existing just, makes our existence worth living, all right? And I think the description in Swanky's own language is very illustrative, right? I'm going to read from it. A moose family on a river in Idaho, big white pelicans landing just 6 feet over my kayak on a lake in Colorado, coming round a bend or a cliff and finding hundreds and hundreds of swallows' nests on the wall of the cliff, and the swallows flying all around, reflecting in the water, so it looks like I'm flying with the swallows. I felt I had done enough. I was complete, okay? So in Swanky's words, nature, as I was saying, is not tampered with. It's not used in a self-dramatizing narrative, but presented as an active presence in a poetics that echoes a kind of pre-symbolic, very literal language, because it's just described like that, all right? There's no symbolic meaning attached to it, all right? And this also, in a way, is echoed in the scenes where Fern simply observes and contemplates and touches nature as it is. It's a kind of erotics of the body where she connects her body with the body with nature, all right? So this can be connected to an ecofeminist practice, all right? An epistemology and an aesthetic rooted simply in the living body, coexisting with the body of the other, all right? And incorporating it in order to feel at home. Zhao builds upon what Jessica Bruder terms and this is probably one of the legacies of Bruder upon the film, the liberty-loving pioneer, okay, which the journalist traces to the economic recession of the 1930s and to the pioneers swarming the site of the latter-day gold rush. This is a quote, all right? Fern's sister makes the same association, okay, and says Fern is doing what the pioneers did, which is a great American tradition, all right? So in the film, blazing sunsets and open roads contrast with the clean, mechanized symmetry of the Amazon worksite. Organized suburban nature antagonizes with wide shots of ample, unrestrained landscapes, evoking the myth of the boundless frontier. And the orderly, silent domesticity of Dave's family house is juxtaposed to the green forest outside, to the cliffs, to also the high ceilings in Fern's room at the house contrast with the coziness and her comfort in her van, all right? So these spatial dichotomies echo Fern's dilemmas and the liminality of being stuck between her mourning, her forced renunciation to the expectations created by middle-class life, and her new relations to space, people, and environment. So Zhao reclaims the myth of the pioneer for the protagonist of her story, yet she also draws attention to the limits and boundaries of social exclusion. Limits to park, limits to safety, limited space ventilation, as we see in a scene, all right, which is very synesthetic, you know, Fern sitting on the toilet in that small van she has just eaten. So it's kind of also disturbing for the viewer. Limited choices, all right, which point to this paradigm of exclusion within inclusion within the capitalist system. And van dwelling is presented as the embodiment of temporary, transient, fleeting sense of freedom, all right, because of the relationships people establish, all right? But with relation to the frontier, the pioneer no longer represents the pursuit of self-interest, the boundless power and possibility of conquest, and which has resulted in the current capitalist system, as Greg Grandin, the historian, says, you know, and he says that there is a gap now between the frontier myth and reality that has widened into a deep, deep, deep chasm, which is the chasm that these people inhabit. Okay, so Jessica Bruder's most important legacy is also this idea of a common understanding, a kinship, a glimpse of utopia, as the journalist says. All right, and I am finishing the presentation with three related images that refer in a way to the pioneer through the idea of the frame and this dichotomy between the inside and the outside. Because in Zhao's Nomadland, the claim for a space within the frontier does not rely on the exploitation or domination of others. You know, many American theories of the frontier, such as Richard Slotkin or Jane Tompkins, have pointed out that there is a dark side to this quintessential national myth, as I was saying, all right? So in this last scene, Fern walks through the door of her home and into the desert, an allusion to this other scene, Ethan Edwards crossing the threshold of his sister's homestead into the wilderness in John Ford's The Searchers. He walks into the landscape that evokes the closing of the frontier, the almost complete colonial expansion that has bred violent, dominating masculinity like his, all right, and it has depended on this masculinity, you know, to also this masculinity that has to live in the fringe between savagery and civilization to make civilization prosper, you know, and sort of hide this dark side behind it. In Ang Lee's Brokeback Mountain, this idea of the frame is alluded to as well, with a significant difference. The exclusion and loneliness of the protagonist is turned inwards, not outwards into the landscape where dominant marginalizing masculinity keeps thriving. In Zhao's film, the open landscape is the metaphor of Fern's conquest of an inner frontier. the acceptance of her laws, her new space in this, nomadic, uncertain America, with some glimmers of hope, of poetry, of connection with others, some enjoyment of nature, temporary. Nothing is for sure, nothing is certain, all right? There is indeed the endorsement of the values of hospitality transmitted by the likes of Bob, Linda, and Swanky. So if, in Bruder's words, the last free space in America is a parking lot, okay, that's the last free space we can count on, Nomadland features forms of attachment and mutuality on the road, okay? Occasional, temporary communities where hospitality belongs to neither host nor guest, but to the gesture by which one of them welcomes the other, right? So that's my contribution today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, María Antònia. If you don't mind, we'll